Hello and welcome to another session for Game Accessibility Conference. I hope you're enjoying all the sessions so far. I'm certain they're great. I'm recording this beforehand, but I know that they're great. This is a great conference and I hope you are enjoying it. I'm going to be talking to you for about 15 minutes about something that is very near and dear to my heart. And that's a call to action to talk about accessibility in marketing. You may be wondering kind of who I am. I'm Steve Saylor. I'm blind and I play video games. I start that pretty much every single video I do because I have a YouTube channel called Blind Gamer. You can find that at youtube.com/snowball. I'm a disabled content creator. I am an accessibility advocate and consultant. I've consulted with studios such as Ubisoft, EA, and most recently Naughty Dog for The Last of Us Part 2. Don't mind Leonardo in the corner back here. He's just always going to be there, but he likes accessibility too, so you should as well. So what am I going to be talking about today? Well, there is a problem in the video games media, or at least in the video game industry, and that is accessibility related. And it's something that we're not really talking about. And that's in regards to accessibility in marketing your games. To kind of give it a little bit of context. So we know a lot about games before they come out, sometimes even years, sometimes even months beforehand. And we get a lot of marketing materials for that. We get trailers, we get reviews, we get gameplay reveals, we get preview events, we get demos, we have interviews, and we just have a lot of marketing material to try to be able to convince the players and gamers to be able to purchase your game. And I understand that, and that's perfectly fine. However, there is almost no information about accessibility pretty much across the board. To kind of give an example, and I'm not pointing this game out or this studio out in particular, it's just using this as an example, Cyberpunk 2077. We've known about this game for going on 8 years. We heard about it in 2012. We've had events, we've had trailers, we've had demos at E3. We've had so much marketing material towards being able to want to be able to get people to be able to play this game. But you know how much accessibility information has been given? One small tweet. It was a reply to a question about whether or not you can customize subtitles. And all they said was that there is going to be the ability to be able to change the font size and the color. That's it. That's all we know. And unfortunately, this is kind of across the board. Even to say even the best examples of accessibility, I'm going to call it The Last of Us Part 2. I know I worked on it, but The Last of Us Part 2 didn't release accessibility info until 2 weeks before the game came out. And they had been working on this for years. Now, I understand the secrecy and the not wanting this stuff to be leaked and the fear that that can be able to give if you talk about accessibility early, that it may get people mad if you don't deliver on those accessibility options before the game. But I'm telling you right now that that is something that we desperately need, and we need it to be able to make our purchasing decisions. We want to be, as disabled players, we want to be included in the hype for all your games. We want to be part of the conversation. But if you're trying to be able to convince us to be able to purchase your game, if we have no idea if we can be able to even play it, that's a huge problem. And that's something that I'm hoping that PR teams, marketers, and studios and developers will be able to fix and be able to add in that info moving forward. And there's several ways to be able to go about that. I do have a few ideas and a few solutions that you can be able to try. And these are going to be kind of a bit broad, but if you want more specifics, I'll have information about how to be able to contact me at the end of this session. The two things to keep in mind when wanting to be able to talk about accessibility publicly can be split into two categories: informational and inclusion. Let's talk about informational first. We want the info beforehand. We want it to be included in the marketing of your game, as I mentioned before. So having that info can be released in several different ways. First off, you don't want to be able to use accessibility to mean approachability. We get it. We're probably creating a game that you want to be able to have available to play across all ages, across all different sort of types of players, from casual to hardcore, if you want to be able to use the sort of outdated terms. And you may want to be able to say that that game is accessible to those players. But in the video game space, accessibility does not mean approachability. So We ask that you be able to use the term approachability if you want to be able to have a game that is approachable to a lot of players, and use accessibility to mean when you're talking about settings and features for disabled players. Now, as far as when to be able to release this information, in that timeline, there's a lot of variables to consider. I used to be able to say, of course, like when a game goes gold, that's a perfect time to be able to talk about accessibility, because you know what you have beforehand, you know what's going to be locked into the game itself. So that would be a great time to be able to release that information. But I understand that going gold can mean different things depending on which studio you're in, what type of game you're working on, and even whether you're an indie studio or AAA studio. So my best answer for that is when you know 100% what features will be locked into the game, discuss it publicly. And you can do that in several different ways. You can release feature lists. When you know 100% what's in the game, it may not be an exhaustive list. You may not want to be able to sort of talk about everything in the settings, which is totally fine. You want to release features that would help most disabled players. And what core features did you know when you were designing that feature that accessibility was in mind? A great example of this is Immortals Fenyx Rising by Ubisoft. They talked about it in a recent Ubisoft Forward. They announced it or what the game was going to be like, and they kind of showed gameplay for the first time. But on the same day that Ubisoft Forward was released, there actually was a blog post that was released on the website and on the official channels talking about the accessibility that will be in the game. It didn't have a full exhaustive list of settings. It had just enough features that would basically prompt disabled players to be like, oh, this might be something that we want to check out and know more information about. So that can be able to build up the hype for the game and include us disabled players in the same marketing at the same time you're releasing that information. You can use marketing materials as a way to show off accessibility, like subtitles, resizable HUD, etc. If you have any of those settings available at that point in the build, show it off in the gameplay. As an example, The Last of Us Part 2, they released a state of play that showed a pretty extensive look at the gameplay. If Naughty Dog or Sony was able to add the subtitles or resizing the HUD or the different color options for the HUD as available, and you put that into the gameplay, it doesn't have to be showcased as like, hey, look at this, look at these amazing accessibility options. Having those included in the recording of the gameplay can show disabled players, hey, these settings are going to be in the game. This is something that's really, really cool, and you want to be able to check out. And we would have been able to talk about the state of play at the same point. You can also follow up on Twitter afterwards if you want to be able to call out certain accessibility options, but do it in a way that'd be like, how cool is this? Did you notice that? Like, talking about that and hyping up the accessibility options is really great, and you can be able to talk about that in depth on social media. You also want to be transparent with your accessibility, good and bad. I totally understand the fear of not wanting to be able to talk about accessibility beforehand, especially if you have to be able to remove those settings later on or change them how you originally had talked about it publicly. I understand that. And that's why I always recommend when you know a setting or a feature is going to be 100% in the game, that's going to be a best time to be able to talk about it. But also, if you know that your game is not going to have accessibility options or as an extensive accessibility options as you wanted to by the time the game comes out, we want to hear about it. We understand that, and we want to be able to provide feedback based on that, because small steps moving forward and being as transparent as possible will make us become fans of you as a studio or as a developer, so that we can be able to follow along with the progress, and so that you can also be able to release patches later on if you're transparent about it. If you think talking about a lack of accessibility is bad, not talking about it is even worse. I know there's going to be a few developers that are going to be watching this. You can approach PR and marketing in that you want to talk about features or accessibility on what you're working on. You're the best person to talk about it. You want to drive that. You want to lead that conversation. You know what you've done and you're passionate about it. You don't want a marketer basically filtering down that info through several people and basically kind of have like almost like a broken telephone type situation. So talk to your marketers, talk to your PR people and communications, and see if there's a way that you can be able to promote that information, whether whether on social media or in videos or on your own personal Twitter accounts or own social media, that's totally fine as well. Obviously, gaining permission about it is key, so keep that in mind. Now, that's to be able to lead up to launching of the game. If you're not able to include a lot of accessibility information in the marketing of your game, you can be able to do that post-launch. You can talk about it on Twitter. You can talk about it on social media. Do a deep dive in how you made that feature. Of course, not everyone is allowed to, totally understand. So like I said, gaining permission would be best. Official Twitter accounts and can retweet what you're mentioning. You have to recognize that when this happens, it could open you up to possible toxicity and harassment. So do it within your own safety and comfort. So that's the information side of the conversation. Let's talk about inclusion. You don't want to segregate disabled players from an average player. How can you be able to do that and include disabled players in that conversation? You can bring in disabled players or content creators for your previews and / events. Kind of bringing up the example of Ubisoft with Immortals Fenyx Rising. They brought disabled creators in to try out the demo and take a look at the demo before the Ubisoft Forward announcement of the game and showing the gameplay, so it can allow us to be able to talk to our communities and show what accessibility options will be available in the game. Now, granted, in the demo itself that we played, it did not have any accessibility options, but what was great was that we did receive a list and features of what accessibility options will be included in the game, and that was also included in that blog post. So it kind of did two things. It was informational and inclusion. And when you include diverse content creators such as disabled players, people of color, LGBTQ+, when you're bringing them in, if you're bringing them in for a different reason than just bringing in a ninja or a Dr. Lupo for their audience, you're bringing them in to show the community that you are part of the community too. You are showing your players and not telling them that you are part of the community. You don't need to single them out as a sort of marketing gimmick. Just having us as part of the group shows inclusion. So include us in those content creator groups that you send out these demos or information or news or media to, because then we can be able to talk about the game and what is available. You want to talk to the disabled community. You want to get their feedback, especially when you're talking about information about accessibility beforehand. The greatest feedback that developers can receive is from players that are going to be playing your game that you may not have even thought about. So you want to get that feedback, and sometimes that feedback can help even when you're in the development process. So you want to be able to be a part of and talking to those disabled players. Bring in disabled content creators when you want, so that they can be able to talk to developers and have a conversation about what's available. You can release that as a video or as a podcast or just within social media, because disabled players and even disabled content creators, we know what questions to ask. We're not doing this as sort of like as a gotcha moment. When you know what's going to be in there, have us talk to the developers, because we're the best people to talk to. So in conclusion, basically what it breaks down to is we want to play your games. We want to talk about your games, but when we don't have the information beforehand of whether or not we can play it, that's hard for us to be able to get excited for what could potentially be our next favorite game. I used to be able to say when I first got into the accessibility community that if there was a feature that was in a game that felt like that it was created for me, I will shout about that to the mountaintops to basically say, this game is awesome to me because I can be able to play it because of this setting. That's the feeling that we want to be able to feel when you're talking about your game. And when you include accessibility as part of the hype that you want to be able to get people to purchase and pre-order your game, that just makes us feel like we are included, that we are part of that conversation. So if you have any questions about any content ideas or what you can be able to do specifically within your studios or within your own development process, or if you want to be able to reach out for consulting on what you're working on, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm at Steve Saylor on Twitter, or you can email me at steve@stevesaylor.net. Or you can also be able to reach out to my colleagues at caniplaythat.com. We have a great site for talking about accessibility and in video games. We review video games from an accessibility standpoint. We provide news, and we've got a really great staff there that will love to be able to talk to you as well. So thank you so much for Game Accessibility Conference for having me. I hope you have a great rest of your conference, and thank you so much. I hope to be able to see you online. Take care. As always, I remain obediently yours. Bye.